It started with a phone call I'd been waiting my whole life to make. I'm James, 28, and I just got promoted to vice president at the tech firm I've been grinding at for the past 6 years. It wasn't some lucky break or a family connection. I built my way up from an entry-level data analyst position, staying late, taking extra projects, earning certifications on the weekends, and flying cross-country for pitches that didn't guarantee a dime. So when the promotion came, I felt like I'd finally broken through. I didn't just want to celebrate. I wanted to share it with the people who'd watched me push through all-nighters in college and pay off student loans with grocery store sushi and instant ramen. That's why I called my parents. I still remember how nervous I was dialing my dad's number, like I was 10 years old again, waiting to show him my A+ science project. He picked up on the third ring, and I didn't waste any time. I told him I'd been promoted vice president. At 28, there was this pause. Not silence, just air, as if he didn't know what to say. Then he chuckled. That's great, James. Really? But, listen, could you maybe not mention it at Thanksgiving? I thought I misheard him. What? He sighed, then lowered his voice like he was saying something noble. It's just, your brother's in a rough patch right now. His freelance stuff hasn't taken off, and he's feeling pretty down on himself. Your success, it just makes things harder. I stood there with the phone pressed against my ear, still in the parking lot outside work, holding a Vinnie Starbucks I'd bought to celebrate. My promotion email was still open on my phone. I hadn't even processed it all yet, and now my own father was asking me to downplay it so my older brother wouldn't feel bad. For context, my brother, Adam, is 31. He dropped out of college in his second year to follow his passion, which has taken the form of everything from dog photography to custom-made tarot decks. My parents have always supported him, financially, emotionally, and in every other way. Even when he crashed their car, skipped rent, or got fired for personality clashes, they'd rally behind him with endless patience and excuses. He's just creative, they'd say. The world isn't made for people like him. Meanwhile, I've been the safe bet. The one who gets good grades, lands safe jobs, shows up on time, and never rocks the boat. And somehow, being the stable one always meant I was supposed to ask for less. Still, I nodded along on the phone. Yeah, okay, I won't bring it up. But something shifted after that call. It wasn't just disappointment. It was this cold, hollow space that settled into my chest, like a door had quietly shut, and I hadn't even realized I was standing in the threshold. I still showed up for Thanksgiving, of course. My mom made her usual dry turkey. Adam brought his new girlfriend, who spent most of the night talking about how corporate jobs were soul-crushing. My parents beamed as Adam shared his plans to launch a mobile coffee art gallery, whatever that means, and when I offered to help him draft a basic business plan, my mom gave me that look, the one that says, don't smother him. So I kept my promotion to myself. I didn't mention the VP title, the raise, or the fact that I'd been offered equity in a fast-scaling company. Over time, the pattern continued. I stopped bringing things up entirely. When I paid off my car, didn't say a word. When my article got published in a major industry journal, didn't share the link. When I bought my first house, a beautiful 2-bedroom condo just outside the city, something I'd been saving for since I was 22, I signed the papers, moved in quietly, and didn't mention it to anyone but close friends. And you know what? For a while, it actually felt peaceful. There were no backhanded compliments, no uncomfortable silences when I talked about work, no forced comparisons. I existed in my own world, and they existed in theirs. But of course, that couldn't last. The turning point came a few weeks after I moved into my new place. I was at a friend's birthday party, sipping a drink on the rooftop deck when I got a text from my mom. It was just a photo, Adam holding up a painting with the caption, "Your brother's first art sale? We're so proud of him." I gave a polite congrats and put my phone away. I didn't mention the fact that I'd just installed custom bookshelves in my home office, or that I was working on a mentorship program for young analysts. But a few days later, my mom called out of the blue. "You never told us you moved," she said, her voice stiff. "Your aunt saw something on Facebook. One of your friends posted about your housewarming. Did you really buy a house?" There was no warmth in her tone, no excitement, just quiet accusation. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "I closed on it last month." Silence. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" I hesitated. Then I said the only thing that felt true. "Because it never feels like you want to hear about the good things in my life." The words hung between us like frost. Her response wasn't denial. It wasn't anger. It was something worse, disappointment laced with guilt tripping. That's not fair, James. We love you. You've just changed. You've become so secretive. Cold. Like you don't want us involved anymore. And that's when I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit until that moment. They didn't want to be involved in my life. They wanted to be involved in his. My accomplishments weren't celebrations, they were threats. Any success I had reminded them of how much Adam was struggling, and rather than push him to grow, they decided to dim my light so he wouldn't feel bad in the shadow. From that moment on, I started pulling away even more. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. I didn't pick fights. I didn't announce anything. I just stopped offering pieces of myself to people who only took them apart. But as the months passed, their questions started getting more pointed. Their tone more hurt. Why didn't you tell us about the trip to Italy? Why didn't you mention that award you got? Why weren't you in the family group chat last weekend? And eventually, it all boiled over. At a family dinner I hadn't even planned to attend, but showed up for out of politeness. That night, Adam brought up his newest setback, and my dad turned to me with a look that still makes my stomach turn. You've always had it easy, James. Some of us don't get lucky breaks. I blinked. You think this was luck? He shrugged. You were always the golden boy. Things just seemed to fall into place for you. I could feel the anger rise in my throat, but I swallowed it. Until my mom chimed in. You don't have to rub it in with your silence, you know. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in an explosive way, but like a rope stretched too tightly for too long. I stood up, put my napkin on the table, and said something I hadn't planned to say, but couldn't hold back any longer. My napkin hit the table with a quiet finality, but inside me, something was screaming. That moment had been building for years. 1,000 tiny paper cuts of being sidelined, silenced, guilt-tripped, and minimized. And now here we were, at a dinner table where the people who raised me were looking at me like I was the problem. Like I was too proud, too cold, too silent. As if I hadn't spent a lifetime trying to make them proud without making anyone else feel small. I'm not rubbing anything in, I said, voice calm but tight. I've just learned that my success only gets celebrated if it doesn't make Adam uncomfortable. My dad opened his mouth like he was about to jump in, but I kept going. You asked me not to talk about my promotion, so I didn't. You told me Adam was struggling and that I needed to tone things down. So I did. You didn't want me to make him feel bad for not having a stable job, or an apartment, I cut myself off before I said driver's license. And I respected that. But now you're sitting here, accusing me of being cold because I didn't tell you about my house. After you made it very clear you didn't want to hear about the good things in my life. My mom blinked like I'd slapped her. That's not what we meant. No, I asked, locking eyes with her. Then what did you mean? Adam, of course, sat there quietly, watching the entire thing unfold with that blank, unreadable expression he'd perfected over the years. The one he always wore when he wanted to pretend he wasn't part of the problem. James, no one's saying you can't be successful, my dad said, his tone careful, measured. We're just saying it's hard for your brother right now. He's been in a tough place. And I haven't, I said, almost laughing. You think getting to where I am wasn't hard? You think I didn't spend nights in a moldy apartment with 2 roommates and a mattress on the floor, eating instant noodles, and calculating how many days I could stretch a $20 bill? You think I didn't want someone, anyone, to be proud of me back then? My voice broke slightly at the end, and I hated that it did. That was the first night I didn't stay until dessert. I walked out into the cold, into my car, and just sat there gripping the wheel. That should have been the breaking point, but it wasn't. Not yet. That moment was like a glass cracking down the middle. The real shatter would come later. After that night, things were weird. Not tense, just awkward. My mom sent a few messages, mostly short texts like, "Hope you're doing okay," or "Adam's opening a pop-up this weekend. We'll be there if you want to join." I never answered. My silence wasn't out of spite. It was just me conserving energy. I didn't have anything left to prove to them, and I'd finally realized that chasing their approval was a treadmill set to infinite. But life didn't pause. If anything, mine picked up momentum. The company sent me to Singapore for a tech conference, where I ended up being a last-minute speaker after someone dropped out. That keynote landed on YouTube and got a decent amount of buzz. A few weeks later, I got asked to consult on a major AI integration project. Then came the interview with Forbes. Not a full feature or anything, just a young leaders in tech spotlight. Still, it was surreal. And I didn't tell my parents any of it. Not because I was hiding, but because I knew what would follow. The guilt, the deflection, the quiet reminders that Adam was still finding his path. Every win would be treated like an indictment. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't have predicted, was that they'd eventually use that silence against me. The betrayal came quietly. It was spring when I got the call. I was in the middle of prepping a big client report when my cousin Danielle rang. She never calls during work hours, so I picked up, worried. "Hey, is everything okay?" There was a pause, then a low, cautious voice. Did you really say you're not helping with the family trust anymore?" I blinked. "What?" "I didn't want to bring it up, but your mom told Aunt Carla that you backed out of the trust. That you said you're too good for the family now. She said you didn't want to be included in the will discussions because it was all beneath you." I stood there frozen, mouse still hovering over a spreadsheet cell. "What are you talking about?" I asked slowly. "I don't know, man. That's just what she said. She made it sound like you cut everyone off and said you were done with the family. Like, permanently." My stomach twisted. I hadn't said anything remotely like that. I hadn't even been part of the trust discussions. I wasn't even aware there were any going on. I hadn't gotten a single message or email. But apparently, my parents had filled in the blanks for me. "Thanks for telling me," I said, heart pounding. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. There's something uniquely painful about realizing your own parents are reshaping your character behind your back to make themselves look better. They were spinning a narrative, one where I was the cold, ungrateful son who'd abandoned the family, too proud to care about anyone but himself. And the worst part? People were believing them. Over the next few weeks, I started getting subtle messages from extended family. My Uncle Paul messaged me, "You know money isn't everything, kiddo." My Aunt Jean sent me a link to a YouTube video called The Importance of Staying Humble. Even my grandma asked if I was doing okay and if work had gotten to my head. That's when I knew. My parents had created a version of me, a distorted, arrogant caricature, to justify why I'd pulled away. And in doing so, they destroyed what little trust one had left in them. I didn't confront them right away. I wanted to be sure. So I started quietly asking questions. I reached out to my cousin again and asked what exactly my mom had said. I called Aunt Carla. I even messaged a childhood family friend who worked in the same accounting office where my parents had reportedly updated the trust. Everything pointed to the same pattern. My parents had told everyone I'd opted out, that I'd rejected the family, that I didn't want to be involved in future planning because I was too successful now and didn't want to be weighed down. They'd taken my silence and weaponized it. That was the breaking point. Not the phone call after my promotion, not the cold Thanksgiving, not the family dinner where they told me I'd had it easy. It was this, the realization that they had twisted my absence into a betrayal, not only refusing to take accountability, but actively turning others against me. That finally severed whatever fragile hope I'd been holding on to. Because I could forgive misunderstanding. I could even forgive emotional neglect. But this was betrayal. And now I was done playing nice. I started planning, not out of pettiness, but out of necessity. I was going to confront this. But not with yelling, not with arguments. I'd spent years being quiet. Now it was time to speak. And when I did, I was going to make sure they finally heard every single word. The days after that realization felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. Like standing in the aftermath of a storm where everything had been upended, but nothing had been cleaned up yet. I didn't sleep much. Didn't eat right either. I went through the motions of work, answering emails, sitting in meetings, leading calls like nothing had changed. But inside, I felt gutted. I'd always known the love in my family was conditional. I just hadn't realized how easily I could be rewritten in their story as the villain. And it wasn't just the lies. It was the way no one, not a single person, called to ask me my side of things. They all just accepted the version my parents had offered. That I was arrogant. That I'd opted out. That I thought I was better than them. It made me question everything. Every memory. Every moment where I thought I was being supported. Was that just politeness? Was I just the plan B while Adam floundered? I thought about texting my mom. I even drafted a message that night. "I heard what you told Aunt Carla. I never said any of that. Why are you telling people I abandoned the family?" But I didn't send it. Not yet. Because I knew what would happen. She'd twist it into a guilt trip, or worse, she'd deny it completely. That's how it always went. The moment you called out the behavior, the script flipped, and suddenly you were overreacting, imagining things, or being dramatic. So instead, I let the silence hang. And for the first time, I leaned into it, not as avoidance, but as space. Space to think, space to feel, space to figure out who I was when I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells or dimming my light to protect someone else's ego. That week, I closed my laptop one evening and sat on the floor of my condo, just staring at the high windows overlooking the city skyline. I'd worked my whole life for this view, for this freedom, and now it felt hollow. But slowly, so slowly, I started rebuilding. Not my career. That was fine. But me. It started with therapy. I'd always brushed off the idea. Too busy. Too expensive. I'm doing fine. But I booked a session with a therapist a friend recommended, a soft-spoken woman named Denise who wore cardigans and had this way of making silence feel safe, not awkward. Our first few sessions were mostly me talking about work, about stress, about trying to balance leadership with being the youngest VP in the company. But she saw through that fast. So, she said in the third session, when did you first feel like your accomplishments weren't safe to share? It felt like a punch to the gut. That was the start. I began journaling again. Every night before bed, just a few paragraphs, memories, feelings, questions I didn't have answers to. I wrote about the time Adam borrowed my laptop for his photography class and returned it with half the keys missing. I wrote about the science fair where I placed first and the way my dad said, "That's nice, but Adam's painting was really creative." I wrote about the year I paid my own way through summer school while Adam got a $5,000 loan from my parents to start a clothing line that turned out to be 5 t-shirts and an Instagram page. Putting it on paper helped me see the pattern, helped me realize that my pain wasn't selfish, that I hadn't imagined it, that minimizing your child to protect another one isn't kindness. It's cruelty wrapped in politeness. From there, I started doing something else I hadn't done in years. I reached out to people who actually made me feel good. Old friends, former coworkers, my college roommate, Devin, who now lived 2 states away and still remembered every inside joke we ever had. We started catching up on weekends over video calls, talking about everything and nothing. It reminded me of who I was before I spent so much energy editing myself for my family. I also started mentoring. There was a young analyst at my company named Priya, bright, curious, and constantly doubting herself. I saw so much of my younger self in her. One afternoon, after a particularly rough team meeting where she got talked over repeatedly, I pulled her aside and said, "Don't wait for permission to speak up. You already have a seat at the table. Use it." She looked at me like no one had ever told her that before. That's when it hit me. I couldn't get the years back. I couldn't force my parents to see me differently. But I could build something better, right here, right now. I could be the kind of person I needed growing up. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something real. The more I leaned into that life, the one I was choosing, the more the noise from my family faded. Not completely, but enough. Until one day, it roared back in a way I didn't expect. It was a Sunday. I'd spent the morning repainting my spare bedroom to turn it into a home gym. I was sweaty, sore, and halfway through a protein bar when I got a text from my dad. Just 3 words. "Call your mother." I ignored it at first. But an hour later, it came again. "Call your mother. Urgent." So I did. She picked up after one ring, breathless and clearly crying. "Oh, thank God. James." My heart immediately clenched. "What's wrong?" "It's Adam. He needs help. A lot of help." I stood still. "What happened?" He took out a loan. A big one. For this new business idea. Some crypto art nonsense. And now he's defaulted. He didn't realize the interest was variable. And now James, it's bad." My throat went dry. "How bad?" "Over $90,000, she said, voice cracking. Silence. Then, "We need your help." There it was. The inevitable ask. The moment I'd been quietly dreading for years. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I knew it would come. Not with accountability, not with apology, but with expectation. I didn't say anything. Just listened. "We're not asking you to cover all of it," she said quickly. "Just enough to get the collectors off his back. You've always been so good with money, James. Maybe you could work out a payment plan for him. Or talk to someone. You're smart. You're successful." My chest tightened. It wasn't that I couldn't afford to help. I could. I had savings. I had investments. I could write a check and solve this overnight. But for once, the question wasn't can I help? It was should I? Should I once again patch the hole they'd made by enabling him? Should I rescue someone who'd sat silent while our parents dragged my name through the mud to protect his ego? Should I once again put out a fire I didn't start, one they kept lighting over and over again? I'll think about it, I said. And I meant it. I wasn't going to make a decision based on guilt anymore, not based on obligation. If I was going to step in, it would be because I chose to, on my terms. But something was brewing inside me. Not just a decision, but a realization. This wasn't just a crisis. It was a pattern, and patterns don't break on their own. Sometimes you have to break them. I didn't know it yet, but that call would be the start of a very different conversation. A confrontation years in the making. A chance to finally put everything on the table, but not the way they expected. Because if they thought I was still the quiet one, they were about to learn just how loud I could be when I finally chose to speak. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious, but because something inside me was finally clicking into place. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to my family's chaos. I was watching it, from a distance, and I was finally in a position to decide what came next. They needed me. That fact alone wasn't unusual. My family always needed something, from time, to patience, to silence. But this time, it wasn't emotional support or the quiet role of the stable son. This time, it was $90,000 in real-world consequences. It was the result of enabling, denial, and the relentless shielding of Adam from any discomfort. And now that discomfort had ballooned into debt, and they thought I would fix it. But I wasn't 17 anymore, trying to prove my worth by being helpful. I was 28, a vice president, a homeowner, financially secure, and emotionally done being the family's backup plan. So I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started pulling threads. I began with Adam's loan. My mother had said it was some crypto art thing, which was vague enough to be concerning. A few well-placed LinkedIn searches and a dive into local business registries later, I found what I was looking for. A defunct LLC registered 6 months ago under Adam's name called MetaVista Studios. The description? Digital metaverse design and NFT marketplace. I nearly laughed. Adam had zero background in tech. I doubted he even knew how to spell blockchain. From there, I checked public records and court filings. Sure enough, a collections agency had filed suit 3 weeks prior. The documents showed that Adam had defaulted on a private loan from a fintech startup that offered high-risk funding to entrepreneurs with no collateral. The interest rate? 22.7%. Variable. The total amount owed, including penalties? $93,482.47. It was worse than I thought. And it wasn't just bad financial judgment. It was reckless, impulsive, and incredibly naive. He had no business plan, no track record, and no idea what he was doing. But because he was used to being shielded, I'm sure he assumed someone, me, would eventually catch him. He was right, but not in the way he expected. I took a walk to clear my head. It was early morning, the city still quiet except for a few joggers and the occasional dog walker. I passed a bakery, the smell of fresh bread wafting out into the street, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about money. It was about the story. My family had been telling a story for years, that I was successful because I had it easy, that Adam was struggling because the world was unfair, and that my role was to stay quiet and supportive while they poured every ounce of sympathy into his latest mess. But what if I told my version? What if I flipped the narrative? What if, instead of bailing Adam out silently, I laid everything bare and made them look at what they'd done? That afternoon, I called my financial advisor. I asked about the legalities of buying debt, specifically, whether a private party could purchase a defaulted loan from a collections agency. As it turns out, in most states, they can. It took me 2 weeks of quiet work. During the day, I played the role of calm, competent VP. At night, I dug through court filings, debt acquisition processes, and private investor agreements. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even my closest friends. This wasn't petty. This was surgical. By week 3, I had what I needed. I contacted the collections firm listed in the lawsuit. I introduced myself as a private party interested in acquiring the debt. At first, they brushed me off. But I persisted, offered a clean, lump sum payment just under the full amount. To them, it was a win. They didn't care who got stuck with the debt, just that they were paid. And so, for $81,000, I became the legal owner of Adam's defaulted loan. Let that sink in. While my parents were calling me cold and secretive, I was signing papers that made me the sole creditor of the very mess they'd tried to dump on my lap. And now? Now I had control. Not to humiliate him, not to destroy him, but to finally force accountability. To make them all see, really see, what happens when you spend a lifetime protecting someone from consequences. The opportunity came 2 weeks later. My mother called again. She sounded more desperate this time, the guilt sharper. "James," she said, "we're scared. Adam's been avoiding the calls. He won't talk to the agency. We don't know what to do. They said court proceedings are starting soon, and he might lose what little he has. He could be sued. His credit. Can we meet?" I asked. She hesitated. "Of course. Just you and us." "No," I said. "Adam too. Everyone. One dinner. Neutral place. I'll cover it." She agreed immediately, probably thinking I was softening, that I'd finally come around and would write a check to patch it all up. But that wasn't the plan. I made a reservation at a quiet Italian restaurant downtown, one with private booths and soft lighting. Not fancy, but not cheap either. Enough to set a tone. I wore a dark suit. Not to intimidate, just to be unmistakably composed. I wanted to walk in and remove every last trace of the emotional, dramatic younger son they kept trying to paint me as. They arrived 10 minutes late, as always. Adam looked tired, his hair messy, wearing an old hoodie and sneakers. My dad looked stern. My mom looked hopeful. Too hopeful. "Thanks for meeting," she said as they sat down. "We appreciate you making time." I nodded. I wanted to talk in person. Too much has been twisted already. She blinked. "Twisted?" I ignored it and turned to Adam. "You know what this is about." He shrugged. "Yeah. Look, man, I screwed up. I just thought." "No," I interrupted. "This isn't a conversation about feelings. It's a conversation about facts." I pulled out a small envelope and placed it on the table. "This," I said, "is the debt transfer agreement. As of last week, I'm the legal owner of your loan." The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't just shock, it was implosion. My dad's mouth opened, then closed. My mom's face paled. Adam looked like I'd just handed him a death sentence. "You what?" he whispered. "I bought it," I said. "Every cent. Your contract, your default, your future collection activity. It's all under my control now." My mom's voice shook. "James, why would you do that?" "To protect the family," I said smoothly. "Just like you asked." No one spoke. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice calm. But I didn't do it to erase it. I did it so we could all finally be honest. "Honest?" Adam spat. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that every time you mess up, someone else pays the price. That you've been allowed to make reckless decisions with zero accountability, while I've been expected to be quiet, generous, and invisible. I bought your debt so I could decide how it ends. Not a court. Not a collector. Me." He scoffed. "So what? You're gonna sue me?" "No," I said. "Not unless you lie again." I slid a second paper across the table. It was a simple, 3-page agreement. "I'm offering to forgive the loan. Fully, under one condition. You write a statement, witnessed and signed, acknowledging the loan, the default, the impact on our family, and the fact that our parents covered for you." "What?" my mom said, her voice rising. "James, that's not fair." "No," I said firmly. "What's not fair is watching a family rewrite history to protect a lie. I want the truth. That's it. In writing. Not for public use. Not for blackmail. Just for closure." "My closure." Adam stared at the paper. "You can't be serious." "I am." And I was. Because forgiveness without truth is just more enabling. And I'd done enough of that for a lifetime. I didn't care if he signed it. I didn't care if they stormed out. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. Adam didn't say anything for a full minute. He just sat there staring at the paper in front of him like it was something radioactive. His face shifted between disbelief, anger, confusion, then something I hadn't seen in years. Shame. Real, raw shame. Not the performative kind he used when our parents scolded him for wrecking the family car or dropping out of yet another career path. This was something deeper. Like he finally realized that the safety net had been yanked out from under him, and that the only person still willing to catch him was demanding he own what he'd broken. "You want me to admit I'm a screw-up," he said quietly, barely above a whisper. "No," I replied, calm and level. "I want you to admit the truth. That you made a choice. That our parents protected you from the fallout. That I was brought in to clean up your mess not because I volunteered, but because I was expected to." He didn't look up. My mom leaned forward, her voice trembling. James, sweetheart, please don't do this. This isn't who you are. I turned to her slowly. Isn't it? Because for the past 10 years, who I've had to be is the one who stays quiet, who hides his success so Adam doesn't feel bad, who's expected to be the adult while everyone else plays pretend. So if finally asking for honesty makes me someone you don't recognize, that says more about you than it does about me. Her mouth opened, but I held up my hand. I wasn't finished. You didn't raise two sons. You raised one mirror and one masterpiece. And every time I showed you a version of myself you didn't like, too confident, too successful, too different, you turned the mirror to the wall. The table went still. I could tell they hadn't expected this version of me. This wasn't the stable James who made polite excuses and sent holiday cards even when he was hurt. This was the James who'd finally stepped into his own power and wasn't asking for permission to use it. Adam slid the paper toward him. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. What happens if I sign? You walk away free, I said. The debt's cleared. I'll send confirmation to the credit bureau, and the case gets closed. And if I don't, then we go to court, I said flatly. And when the judge asks why the debt was transferred, I'll hand over the entire paper trail. And I'll answer every question. Under oath. He exhaled, and for a moment I thought he might argue, or tear the document, or storm out. But instead, he signed. In silence. He signed the statement, acknowledging the debt, the loan, and the fact that our parents had misled the extended family about my supposed abandonment. He didn't apologize. Not directly, but I didn't need him to. The truth was enough. I took the papers, placed them neatly back into the envelope, and stood. Thank you, I said. My dad finally spoke. This feels extreme, James. I turned to him. Extreme is rewriting someone's character to protect someone else's pride. Extreme is letting lies stack up for years because the truth is uncomfortable. I didn't create this situation. I just stopped pretending it didn't exist. My mother looked like she might cry, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I added. I'm doing this to heal me. Then I left. No dramatic walkout. No slamming doors. Just quiet resolve. A sense of closure I hadn't felt in years. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, my breath visible against the city lights. I didn't look back. The fallout came quietly. Within a week, I sent Adam the formal debt release letter. I attached the cleared balance statement and marked the loan account as settled with zero owed. He responded with a single-word email, received. I never heard from him again. Not out of anger, I suspect, but because there was nothing left to say. For the first time in his life, he'd had to face the consequences of his choices, without a parachute. And though I'd ultimately let him walk free, he'd done so by confronting what he'd spent years avoiding. My parents tried to patch things up a few times. A text here, a voicemail there, a generic thinking of you card that arrived in the mail 3 weeks later with a handwritten note. We miss you. Family should stick together. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a vague wish for reconciliation, as if that would erase everything. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because I was done playing the game where silence equaled forgiveness. Instead, I focused on building something new. I kept mentoring. Priya, the young analyst at work, got promoted 3 months later. She told me in private, eyes shining, "You believed in me before I did." I started hosting small dinners with close friends, people who saw me as James, not as the role I played in a family dynamic. I renovated my condo's guest room into a studio. Not a gym, not an office, a space for me. I started painting again. Badly at first, but it felt good to make something just for the joy of it. And one Sunday, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun set behind the skyline, and realized something. I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone anymore. Not through silence. Not through rescue missions. Not through being the good son. I just had to be. A few months later, my cousin Danielle called. "You know," she said, "your parents are still telling people you overreacted." I chuckled. "Let them. But doesn't it bother you?" I thought about it. Then I smiled. "No," I said, "because I have the truth, and I don't need anyone's permission to live in it." That night, I took the signed statement from Adam, sealed it in a folder, and locked it in my filing cabinet. Not out of pettiness, not to hold it over him, but as a reminder that silence is not peace. That family should not require self-erasure. That telling your story is not betrayal. and that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's clarity. The kind that sets you free. I didn't burn the bridge. I just finally saw it for what it was and chose to build a better road.